Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today I'm joined by the Ringer's Howard Beck to answer two very important questions. Where do the Knicks rank in the Eastern Conference pecking order to enter next season? And what stars will they target this summer? All that and more next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks, and I want to remind you this is part two of a two-part episode with Howard Beck. So if you haven't already, please check out part one. We talk in a little bit broader strokes about the Knicks as an organization. Howard wrote a great article on The Ringer titled Behind the Scenes of the NBA's Most Unlikely Revival. So I wanted to bring him on to talk about what kind of insights he got from opposing front offices about the Knicks and where they are in sort of the broader NBA pecking order and how they've established themselves as a respectable organization. In this episode, again, we zoom in a little bit more on the specifics, like where do they rank in the East and what stars are they going to try to go after this summer. But before we get into all that, I wanted to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And I wanted to remind you to make Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we're now available on all platforms. So if you're checking us out on YouTube, it might be the fifth time this week if you become an everydayer. But if you're not listening all 5 days of the week, be sure to hit that subscription button, that notifications bell to ensure you don't miss an episode. Like, comment, leave a 5-star review, all that good stuff. It really, really helps out the show. Without further ado, let's get into it with Howard's second time today, continuing to talk through the Knicks' future.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult one without like sitting down and actually like going over like team by team and really being methodical about it. I'd be curious to know, like, if ESPN's still doing their, they do their future rankings.
So we do that as a podcast, and I've never had the Knicks in the top 10. I think Alex maybe has had them at 6 or 7 at some point. But this year I was thinking about it, I was like, I probably have them like maybe 6th, 5th, 6th right now. But maybe that's biased, but yeah. Yeah,
no, I think they gotta be, when you think about the talent that they already have and how young Jalen Brunson is as their key player, their cornerstone, and then on top of it still having all their own draft picks, a few extra draft picks. Look, let's not get carried away. Occasionally I'll hear some Knicks fans, acting as if this is like an Oklahoma City pile of or cache of picks. It's not at that level. And these picks, some of them, it's still questionable how valuable they'll be. And to the Knicks' credit, their own picks are getting less and less valuable because they're really good. And so the picks are going to be low. There was a time when a couple of years ago, you would have said the best picks the Knicks had in their possession were their own and not the ones from Milwaukee and wherever else, because all those picks had so many protections on them or were so likely to be lower or to convert to 2 seconds that the best picks were the Knicks picks because people would be betting on the Knicks to lose. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I don't think anyone's looking at the Knicks picks and saying, oh, those are super valuable. But having multiple picks does give you options. It gives you more flexibility in making deals. And so there's that. Yeah, I think, I'll conservatively say top 10 for future rankings. I don't know where within the top 10. Again, it's too big of an exercise to try to look at. And obviously, like the Thunder have an incredible young team, incredible array of talent, and a bazillion picks from all over the league. And there's some other teams that are really stocked with picks as well. The Nets don't have the Knicks talent, but the Nets have all those Suns picks. And if the Suns fall off a cliff, which seems likely in the next couple of years, the Nets could be really sitting pretty with all those picks. And then, of course, Houston has all the Nets picks, which also, if the Nets can't figure this out soon, all those Nets picks that the Rockets own could be very valuable. So anyway, the Knicks are in great shape. If I'm going to be, a little more conservative on their trajectory or what their potential is as constructed right now, I would just say this. In this league, to be a champion, and it's different in recent years, right? Like we are out of the super team era. And I keep saying this, like what we have now is more ensembles. One supreme star, one incredible player, Jokic and an ensemble, Giannis and an ensemble. Now, Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton aren't your average ensemble, right? They may not be perennial All-NBA guys, but they have both been in that tier at times in their careers. And if you're doing like the top 35, top 50 of the NBA or whatever, like at full health, Middleton and Drew Holiday were going to be top 50 and maybe even Brook Lopez in some of those years, right? but it's not a LeBron, Wade, Bosh super team. It's not a Curry, Draymond, Clay, Kevin Durant super team. Point being, the Knicks don't have to have that level of talent in this era of the NBA to be considered a contender. So you've got Jalen Brunson, who is now, by definition, top 5. Finished 5th in the MVP voting. He was 5th on my ballot as well. And no reason to think that he's going anywhere anytime soon. So you now have the most elusive thing. A top 5 to top 10 player is really important. You need another player who's either top 20, top 25, and Julius Randle at good health can be. But as you know, as a Knicks fan, and I hear this from my Knicks fan friends all the time over the last few years, Randle, they drive him crazy. They're these high highs and these low lows. He's very frustrating, and his heart's in the right place, but sometimes his head is not, and the consistency isn't there. And I did hear from some people, I didn't put this in the story because it just didn't really fit, and the story was already getting very long, but there's some who posited that, yes, I get it. Yes, there was a good track record or win-loss record with Anunoby, Brunson, Randle, but there was also a case to be made that a lot of what made the Knicks really work well in the latter months of the season and into the playoffs was a very clear kind of approach here. Jalen Brunson's going to have a really high usage rate, and everybody else is going to rebound the living shit out of the ball and make open threes and defend their butts off, right? Does it work as well with Randle back in there? I tend to think like they'll be fine. They'll figure out the right balance once he's back in. But it is a question. It's a legit question, like redistributing the possessions. I think ultimately, and I think that you probably get a split right down the middle with Knicks fans on this, and you might get a split right down the middle with other NBA scouts and executives too. I'm not sure if the Knicks are a contender with Brunson, Randle, and supporting cast, or if they need to upgrade from Randle. I tend to lean toward they need an upgrade from Randle. I tend to think that he's not his ceiling is not high enough and he's not consistent enough. And he's at a stage in his career where I don't know what you're expecting much more evolution. I kind of tend to think that they need to upgrade the second star to become a real contender. But the other path there is to have, if you can't have 2 top 20 guys, have 3 top 30 or 3 top 50 or whatever. And I don't think they have a third guy who's top 50 right now. I mean, I don't know who you would want to make a case for.
I think Anunoby would be the guy for me that I'd argue. But
and Anunoby's injury history clouds that, unfortunately. And he's a free agent. They still have to re-sign him, and I think they will. But I agree. Anunoby at his best and at full health, and with if he can play most of the season, yeah, I mean, defensively alone, he's incredible. And you see a scoring burst now and then. So I think that's the alternate path is do you have 3 top 40 to top 50 guys? And then they got to keep everybody. Can they keep Hartenstein? Can they keep Anunoby? The good news is whatever happens next, they have the ability with a lot of reasonable contracts and all those picks to fill in any gaps if need be. So I'll stop short of saying contender only because I want to see a full season with their new big 3-ish, which is, Brunson, Randle, and Anunoby. I think that's where I would be a little more cautious. The Celtics are going to the finals for the second time in 3 years. They've been to 6 conference finals. They have 2 guys who we know in any given year are either all NBA or just outside of all NBA. And they've got multiple other guys who have been all-stars or all-NBA in the past, or again, have been in that tier, even if they didn't always get the nod. So they just have so much depth. And, and then you look at the teams out West, that are great and only getting better too. So I think the Knicks are, either, if you want to say low first tier or high second tier, either way.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Howard in just a sec to get into, I think, the part of this podcast you've probably all been waiting for. What stars should the Knicks go after this summer? What are the big names to watch from an NBA insider? We get into that next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we wanted to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. When I visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, where my eyes go is the NBA title odds. Right now, the Minnesota Timberwolves are plus 1,300 to win the NBA championship. That's because they're down 3-1. I would put a little change down on that. Dallas is a really good team. I don't think Minnesota ultimately comes back from down 3-0. But if they do it, I think they'd have a great chance of beating the Boston Celtics. They just have to win 2 more games at home, 1 on the road. It's not the craziest thing in the world. It has to happen sometime, right? So head there today. Make some money with us. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Yeah, it's a small sample size, but I look back at that January, and the Knicks posted for that month the best net rating any team posted in basketball in any month, and the Celtics tied that mark twice, who I would call, one of the better regular season teams we've ever seen in NBA history by those metrics, and that's just the issue, and that's sort of the crux of, like, this is how we go for 2 hours on this, but that's the crux of the whole Julius Randle, because I actually thought after just a disastrous start to this year, where we were coming on this pod and saying the Knicks just have to get rid of this guy, like whatever it takes, attach a pick, like doesn't matter, to like I thought he was playing the best basketball of his life when he got hurt, and I thought he was like a more proactive ball mover, and he was like, I mean, not that the volume 3-point shooting was great the year before, but he was like using like his physicality in a way that, like, at least on the Knicks, he had never done in the past. And he was playing great basketball. And OG Anunoby was just a seamless fit in that. And they killed the Sixers with Embiid. They killed the Nuggets at full strength, like a 40+ point win. They were up by 20 against the Wolves and held on to win that game. Like, they didn't play the Celtics, but it was a stretch that kind of had you believing, like, all right, like if this is who they actually are, like, maybe like in the right matchup, like a little bit of injury luck, which they obviously did not have, like they could go on a run here, and it makes a case for the Knicks just running it back. But I think what you were getting at with Brunson, which is something, again, we've talked about quite a bit on the show, is like, can you split the baby and like trade Julius Randle for, like, the name Knicks fans are going to throw out there always is Mikal Bridges, and someone who gives you a little bit of that creation and that star power, but also just a lights out shooter at that spot, and allows Jalen Brunson to play with a truly spread floor, because that was sort of the magic of Julius Randle going down. Kind of because Josh Hart is also not always regarded as a great shooter, which the Sixers found out is only a sometimes thing. But like a genuine 4-out spacing around Jalen Brunson, like multiple elite defenders around him, like that is one way to go. The Julius Randle avenue, where you have a second really good shot creator, is another way to go. Again, that is probably a whole podcast unto itself. Go ahead, Howard. Yeah. No,
I was just gonna say, I don't want to get into the Bridges thing because it's a long tangent, but I don't think that the Nets are trading him anytime soon, even though I think they should, because they're not going anywhere, and I don't understand the point of holding out of Mikal Bridges.
I think he's more so in my mind like an example of like the type of guy you would trade. And the guy, a name you threw out when you were on this pod last year, Paul George, is like, that's another example of someone who could be going somewhere.
I mean, listen, let's see what happens with the Timberwolves tonight, but I still think Cat is in play at some point, and obviously the CAA ties and Leon and West ties there is, people may their mileage may differ whether how they feel about Cat as an upgrade over Randall. Another very polarizing player who has some high highs and low lows. If the Suns crash and burn, Devin Booker, another CAA guy. So like those are names that like other people around the league will sometimes toss around as like, who are the Knicks going to go try to get next? Because inevitably that's coming, right? Like they are going to go get another guy, whether it's a third guy in addition to the two they have, if they could pull that off, or whether it's using Randall plus other stuff to go get a star. I would also just say one other thing about just the pecking order in the East, right? So Boston is that they're not going anywhere anytime soon. The Bucks went healthy, and they've got work to do. The Bucks, they've gotten a little old and everything else. But like, look, we all know that the path in the East was a little smoother this year for the Celtics. And if we're going to say that about the Celtics, we have to say it about everybody else too. The Embiid was banged up. The Sixers were not at full strength. The Sixers have the ability to go get a third star this summer. We'll see if that works out. It might be Paul George for all we know. The Bucks are going to get healthy, and they've still got Giannis. Like Giannis and Embiid are perennial MVP candidates and have been for a while. And Tyrese Maxey is, shooting up the NBA rankings and just, is a shooting star, right? Now that the Pacers have established themselves, Yeah, and Siakam will now be there, presumably re-signed full time. Halliburton, Siakam, like we talk about this, to be a contender, you start off with usually your best or two best players. They've got their 1-2 punch, and I think Halliburton and Siakam is a pretty nice place to start too. And then guys like Nembhard and Nesmith who have had kind of breakout years. The Cavaliers are going to hire a new coach soon. They've got talent there. They've got stuff to figure out. I think there's a lot of teams at the top there. Miami's going to reload in some way. The East is going to be harder again next season. Teams are going to get healthy, and it's going to be a little tougher. Again, I don't want to. This is not to throw out too many sobering notes here, but one of the things that people kept saying when I was working on that story for The Ringer last week, or over the last month or so before it ran last. When did it run? Did it run last week? I
think so. Yeah.
Time is a flat circle. This time of year, especially, everything's a blur. But a lot of people said, "Listen, I wouldn't go too far with the Knicks having having this big breakout. Like, yes, they're legitimately a 50-win team. Yes, they've had a good playoff run, but this was a down year for the East, and there's no questioning that. Like, nobody can argue that it was a down year for the East, and." I think that the Knicks are in better shape in some ways than maybe the Kings were a year ago, but the Kings are instructive in that the Kings, are third in the West a year ago in a down year in the West. And then the Kings did nothing wrong, just kind of stood pat, hoped for internal development and continued improvement. And a bunch of teams in the West got healthy or made other additions. And suddenly the Kings are dropping, to, the lower part of the standings and into the play-in. Through no fault of their own, really. They didn't get any worse.
Can I just throw out though, Howard? Like, part of what defined the Kings, they were the healthiest team in the NBA last year, while the Knicks finished the series with literally their 5 highest paid players. Their 5 highest paid players, it's all on the bench. Yeah, so that's kind of my counters. Like, I think the Knicks have the worst luck of any of those teams. Yeah,
no,
but I hear you, and like I think that's a reality where like. Fans and like I'm guilty of this at times, like because something happened one year, you assume it's going to happen the next, and like that's not always true. These things change very quickly in the NBA, and I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's not linear, and saying like whether it's a player or a team, well, they got to this point this season, and they're only going to keep getting better.
Yeah, it's not always true.
I mean, look at the Hawks making that run to the conference finals a few years back. Sorry to bring that up, but the conference.
No, I'm happy with where they've gone now, so it's okay.
Right, exactly. The Knicks fans got the last laugh, but I think probably a lot of people who were Hawks fans, and I think Hawks ownership thought, "Oh, look, we've arrived. Here we are. We're just going to be here every year now." And no, they've gone backwards. So no, it's the NBA is very unpredictable, and a lot of times it's not about what you do; it's about what your rivals do. It's about your health. It's about their health. A lot will happen this summer. Like, all that said, I mean, yeah, I expect the Knicks are going to be a top 4-ish team in the East next season, but it's going to be harder to repeat what they did, even with full health, even with accounting for all of their own misfortune along the way in terms of injuries. It's going to get harder just by nature of other teams also getting healthy. And it's not to say that I'm not comparing, player games lost Knicks versus others. They may have had more, but it's the kind of players that teams lost and that they're getting back. The Knicks will have a full season, presumably with Anunoby and Randall and Brunson. The Bucks will have a full season with Siakam and Halliburton just broke through, and Halliburton was dealing with injuries over the last half of the season. Like, everybody can point, not everybody, but a lot of teams can point to something, right? Yeah. So it will be interesting going into next season, but they're very well positioned, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair point, and it'll be interesting to see. I like the Knicks' depth, and they're like, if everyone's back, just they have a lot of different options and a lot of different ways they can attack teams on both ends. But Howard, I know we're running really long, so just we'll keep this one really short. But just to finish on this, because you're cued in. I know you threw out Paul George as a name last year, like in research for this article and just in general, like. Is there anyone specific, like, and it could be like star caliber, or it could be someone more like Alex Caruso, like you're hearing the Knicks are thinking about, or someone who's thinking about maybe wanting to be a Knick? And to be clear, like, just because like me asking this question maybe defeats the whole beautiful point of your article that like the Knicks like don't need a star. Like, I'd be content with them bringing everyone back, but just because that always feels like a reality. And with the aprons now looming for the Knicks with those extensions for Randall and Brunson and whatever they give Anunoby, like this summer sort of feels like the time. So I guess all those caveats aside, I'll be the slovenly Knicks fan to end this pod and say, where are the stars, Howard? Who are we getting?
I think inevitably they're going to go chase someone and probably get someone. I couldn't tell you who it is. Like I said earlier, my eyes are still on Towns and Booker. I'll stick with that. It's often the case, though, that the player or team goes and gets is the one we weren't anticipating. And if Paul George leaves the Clippers, at this stage, because he's a free agent, I think it's going to be to sign with somebody in free agency, whether that's Philly or somewhere else. And there's, I think, still a good chance he stays with the Clippers. I don't really have a great answer for you, Gavin. I wish I did, and I should have done more of a deeper dive before we got on about possibilities this summer, free agency. It's tough because, teams over the cap as the Knicks are, like, you've got some cap exceptions, but I'll be honest, I'm still grappling with how to factor in the apron and the second apron and the restrictions it puts on teams. And, it's not like the old days where you could just kind of look like, all right, who's got cap room? Who's got their mid-level? Who's got their biannual, whatever else, other exceptions? Who's available? But do we think they'll go for that much? It's gotten a lot more complicated trying to project out. So I think most likely the next big move or addition they make is via trade, not free agency, more than likely, just because of all the cap considerations. And I think a lot of it's going to depend on how some of these teams see themselves. Like you mentioned, Alex Caruso, like half the league would love to go get their hands on Alex Caruso. The Bulls have not been willing to break up what they have. They've been perfectly content to be on the treadmill of mediocrity. It seems like that's just their new franchise slogan. And, like there are teams that may need to pivot. And again, like, are the Suns really just going to run this thing back? Do they really have any hope of this working? I don't think they do. I think, they'll probably try to run it back, and then eventually it's going to crash and burn, and they'll have to start pivoting. Brandon Ingram is almost certainly available this summer. I think he's almost certainly getting moved this summer. Is that a move that the Knicks would be interested in? I don't know.
It doesn't really do it for me, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't think wherever Donovan Mitchell ends up, staying in Cleveland, or if he's traded, I don't think the Knicks are getting involved in that again. It doesn't make sense. I didn't actually really like it the first time for them, just because they had just signed Brunson. And no, I did not know Brunson would become this Brunson, but I just thought undersized backcourt, which is what Cleveland ended up with Garland and Mitchell, and two guys who need the ball in their hands. And now that Brunson has become this Brunson, I'm even more convinced that that's not the right play. So if Mitchell's moved it somewhere else, I don't think he's the right fit for the Knicks, and I think they've probably moved on philosophically there as well. A lot's just going to depend on how the draft unfolds and how some of these teams evaluate themselves and whether they're ready to hit various reset buttons across the league. So I'm sorry I don't have any other great spicy names to throw your way about Knicks targets.
No, I think Booker's been thrown out a lot as like what was like coming into this year, sort of like a long shot fantasy name, laugh it off, to now like 2 years down the line, who knows? But Howard, I appreciate your time and all your insights. Before I let you go, can you tell everyone one final time where they can find all your great work and where they can check you out on podcasts? Of
course. Yeah. All my written work, of course, always at theringer.com. And you can always hear me on the Real Ones podcast every Monday with Logan Murdoch and Raja Bell, and occasionally on the second show, which is Thursdays or Fridays, which will include this week. I'm doing the Friday show with Logan. Always on Twitter at Howard Beck. So come find me there as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Howard. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Some Knicks optimism. You love to hear it. We'll have plenty more for you on the NBA draft coming up next week on Locked On Knicks.